What a match. Full holds, fuller holds, and Glad's being knocked out of the tournament after winning back-to-back ones, and overall just a very messy match. But how? How are Glads doing so poorly, especially after signing Happy, which is a huge upgrade over Patty and Shield and the Sojourn in my opinion, allowing them to run the arguably most optimal comp right now, the one that fits most into their aggressive and fast playstyle? I'll go over that today, so join me as I try to look into how the Toronto Defiant defeated the Los Angeles Gladiators. We start map 1 on Ilios, and round 1 is a bit of a mess. Like many other teams, the Glads just looked disjointed and indecisive. I feel like they won more fights, but the lack of good focus fire made it take forever, and most of the fight wins here were due to Happy getting crazy shots either way. Despite being a new pickup, Happy has really looked phenomenal, despite ironically being on peak Gladiators. Defiant were just consistently more aggressive. For example, there was one fight Happy gets an early pick onto Alto. While Happy does get picked by Hisu after, Glad should take the opportunity to rush at the Defiant as the rush has lost more DPS to Kevster. Instead, they back off and let Defiant take the point. Another fight, Skewed goes down early and the Defiant immediately push up, despite although losing the 1v1 to Kevster. That's one thing the Defiant did poorly on. Although dies a lot, he must have died once a fight. Man, even on fights they win, he dies. It's a little ridiculous, but whatever. Rhino and Astro also had stinkers of a game as well. Astro went super aggro a lot and peaked and got cut down by Hisu, leaving Glad without heals a lot. And Rhino was doing his own thing. I think the peak Rhino moment was when he did a 0-man rampage at half health with no one to follow up on it, and his Brig is still coming back from spawn. He gets down to 10% health during the animation and dies quickly, then Happy still manages to clutch out the fight win anyway. That's the story of the Glad stage so far, quite frankly. Final point, but Choring probably played out of his mind. He had a huge kill on Skewed, and he had a perfect boop to save Twilight from Kevster at the end. This is probably Choring's best match so far. If we go into round 2, it is not too much better for the Glads. They really only win one fight here, and yet again, instead of Happy getting an early pick onto Hisu. The Glads just have zero coordination here. Every member of the team is seemingly off doing their own thing. There's so many more moments where a Defiant member gets low, and there's just no follow-up on a kill. Hisu surviving, being below half HP, and Kevster diving him was very tilting. But overall, the Glads do play this very poorly. Defiant played this well, though, obviously. Their focus fire is significantly better. They were able to group up in advance, which made the Glads play the rally passively, and Hisu was lapping Happy and ult charged by the end. Overall sloppy from the Glads, but they clean up in time for their next map, Midtown. Ironic that Midtown is their best map, am I right? We start round 1 on a total stomp. They only quote-unquote lose one teamfight and only have 2 deaths the whole time, both on Funny Astro. They just seem to have a better grasp of how to play around this map compared to Ilios, where Defiant can play more split up and single out members of the Gladiators easily. There's no weird flanks coming from any Gladiators, no real isolation. They all play around the payload and single out positioning mistakes from the Defiant very well, getting an early pick on most of the fights. Defiant were just scared to contest to the point Twilight went on so he could try and bionade them off the point. It kinda worked, and Glads backed out for one fight, only losing Funny Astro, but they came back with 4 ults and just completely rolled the Defiant. It was pretty funny watching Twilight massively whiff asleep onto Reiner though. They finished with 3.5 minutes due to a great showing of ult rotation, decisive dives, and great individual performances. Other than Funny Astro, but that's okay. It's also worth noting that Hisu was kind of forcing the Ash here. Cards of the Defiant have to play slow, and Gladiators take advantage of that through constant aggression and pressure onto the Defiant. However, the Defiant somewhat figure out the Glad style. The Glads play forward in order to pressure the Defiant back to their spawn, but after the Gladiators engage after a good fight pick on Hisu, Hoppe gets a huge knife and manages to counter it, and Defiant turn the fight on their heads. Glads then try to engage with Overclock, but Defiant passively counter it, and then go mega aggressive and take point 2. They do get held due to a big rampage and struggle to take space, but then Rhino tries to get a flank kill onto Hisu and just feeds. They eventually take point with 1.5 minutes. Glads did show a good understanding of the map control and their win conditions here, at least. Despite me ragging on the flank, Hisu is probably the biggest threat in Toronto. His Bobs and Dynamite do wonders for the Defiant's map control and strategy, but it's still a massive throw from Reiner. But the Defiant played this very well, despite giving up 3 minutes trying to get a decent engage on point C. We start the 3rd round, and Glad show off their newfound talent at losing fights despite a good first pick. Kevster finds Hisu very early, but Funny Astro goes aggressive to boop Hotba out of position, gets chased down and dies. Funny Astro has big overaggression issues this entire series, but it also shows how good Toronto is at their focus fire, that they were able to immediately turn and take down a speed-boosting Lucio. Glads hold them pretty much right away, though thanks to their ult usage being better. They get through round 4 pretty fast as well, capitalizing on mistakes like Charing being out of position and Hoppa's misused command shout, despite this fight still being scrappy. But Glads take fight map 2. We go on to map 3 and it's Dorado. Historically a very strong map for the Glads. They have an insanely high win rate on it, but that's mainly due to their Winston and dive gameplay. How did they fare on the Jumper Queen comp? Not very well, it turns out. Their defense is good. Kevster goes absolutely berserk, basically just killing everyone he comes across. Kevster literally got the first pick every single time. Defiant were just not doing anything about him as he repeatedly dove the backline and found Hisu, making Defiant have to fall back. Glads overall played well as well. They played around the objective, were able to force out Charing's speed before Kevster bladed. Reiner and Astro didn't feed their brains out, and they made space and enabled Kevster to pop off. Good stuff. But then we get into round 2. Want to know how many meters Glads got on their offense? 17. 17 meters. Want to know how many kills they got? 1. This is the definition of a forward hold. This takes Defiant playing this almost perfectly, and also Glads playing this very badly, unfortunately. The first fight Happy tries to come out of the Ash, but then gets left behind in the rotation and dies early. Hotpick gets so low, but Kevster or Reiner aren't there for the follow-up, unfortunately. And Defiant rotated around the building corner perfectly. Hotba hiding there and peeking so that the cart can't make any progress. Hisu covering flanks, Twilight just hiding behind the building. A 2-minute-long fight occurs where no one dies, but Glads are forced back by a Dynamite and Bob from Hisu. Toronto engages with Beat, and then Hotba engages with Rampage, shaving off another minute from the time bank. 1 minute left. Glads now have 3 ults, no way they lose, right? Happy pops Overclock after Kevster dies, and then gets dove on by Twilight and Hotba, canceling it. Happy has had no space to work with here. I don't think he plays especially badly here, but when he's getting pressured this much, where he has to basically get into spawn to get any decent angles, there's not much he can do. Reiner and Astro need to coordinate their speed so they can at least try to get them outside of that corner, but Reiner is constantly having his shouts eaten away with the dynamites, but I still think he could have been more aggressive with the speed at least. Reiner hits a fat one-man rampage and kills Hotba, but Kevster holds onto his blade for Overwatch 3 and uses it after Aldo pops his blade and just gets killed. There's the Defiant collapse on him, and they get held at 17 meters. Defiant played this almost perfectly, with fantastic rotations around the corner of the building, constant pressure on Happy and Reiner, high ground control from Aldo and Shorung to protect Hisu, and a lack of aggression and proactivity from Reiner and Kevster. Huge mess that booms the Glads for the rest of the series, aka the next map. Seriously, I've never seen Skew and Kevster so mad before. We enter the next map, New Queen Street, and Hisu's on the Sojourn, allowing Defiant to move around the map better and get the jump on Glads. This map is very reminiscent of the first map, without as many happy carries. Glads are incredibly disjointed. Reiner gets hard diffed by Hoppa, finding himself alone behind the Defiant multiple times. There was one time where Reiner tried to solo rampage Defiant after a flank and just feeds. Like, he's absolutely boomed. Skewed and Funny Ass are also very poor ult usage. The main reason this map is even slightly competitive is just Kevster. Literally just him. He plays out of his mind and bails out Glads from losing the first checkpoint like 4 times in a row. It's insane. He kept the damage about equal despite Happy going more or less silent, despite being on a good hit scan map. It's just a giant tug of war. Both teams get to the checkpoint whenever Toronto seem like they're going to cap. Kevster bails out his team with a good 2 or 3k. When Glads get to the opposing checkpoint, Defiant use an ult or 2 proactively and out-tempo the Glads. Toronto win due to a fat Junker Queen diff, eliminating Glads from the Summer Showdown. It's an absurd game. But Defiant just showed a much better understanding of the meta. They knew when to go forward, were better at their rotations, knew when to pull back. I think they forced the Ash a bit and had to play too slow, but it still worked out. Glads played like a 5-man team instead of a team of 5, if you know what I'm saying. I also think Reiner just had a stinker of a match. Junker Queen is meant to set the tempo of the match with her command shouts and just bowling forward, but he's consistently been using his shout overly passively in almost every game I've seen so far. He just seemed boomed in this match too, constantly trying to go on flanks by himself and trying to go hard carry mode, and then just feeding. It's a bit of a he's just wasting a very strong ability. Kevster again kind of felt like he needed 2 maps to warm up. His first map was a little abysmal, and while he did hard carry the last 2 maps to the best of his ability, it just wasn't enough. Teams are just finding a much better way to play the composition. The focus fire, tempo setting, and style of the teams are developing this into a very top-heavy meta. And Glads, who tried to throw money at their issue and integrate a brand new player into the roster in a synergy-heavy meta, rather than buckle down and get a better understanding of the macro of this comp, are getting left in the dust. The players are theoretically the best in the world, especially the support line. The support line is constantly the issue here, being uncoordinated, Astro making weird decisions. I hope they can make a comeback. This is potentially the biggest performance drop-off in Overwatch League history, and in a meta that hypothetically fits them the best. Just a clear coaching issue. Under who? Thanks for watching. Remember to hit like and subscribe for more. I upload nearly daily Overwatch League content, and I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs by the end of Season 5, so any subscription helps greatly. Thanks.